Varun is the co-founder and CTO of Aspiring Minds, a very interesting company that is based out of Bangalore, right?
I mean, we're based out of Gurgaon, but we have an office in Bangalore.
Yeah, so many of you may have seen Shashank, who was a person who used to work there. He gave a talk here. But even if you didn't, Aspiring Minds is an organization which enables evaluation of people who do programming, mostly for employment, and it's a very successful company. And Varun has a master's from MIT, and then he co-founded this company. But today, I don't think he's going to talk about Aspiring Minds. He's talking about this new book that he has written, Leading Science and Technology, India Next. And without any further ado, Varun for you. Yeah,
sure. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me, Sriram. It's a pleasure to be here. I have visited the lab many times in the past, at least 3 times in the past, but first time giving a talk here. And I think Shashank and Vinay, 2 people from Aspiring Minds, have talked at Microsoft Research here in India. So quickly getting into the topic. So this is a book which recently came out. This is how it looks. It is about, the basic idea of the book is it's about the research ecosystem in India. I started writing this book around 2 years back, and it came out this year. The basic motivation of the book was that I felt that we talk a lot about in India about economic growth. We talk a lot about social development. Of course, we talk about a lot of other things like Bollywood, cricket, and so on. But we don't talk enough about scientific research and why it is important for India, where does India stand, and what should be done. So I thought I'd make an attempt at illuminating this topic both for the general public. So it's the book which I wrote is a general reader book. You don't have to be a researcher to read the book, but also talk to specialists at the same time in illuminating what are some of the issues with the research ecosystem in India. So is research and innovation really important for India? And if it is, why it is? Let's explore this question. So in the book, I give 6 reasons, and I'll talk about some of them out here. So first is getting large economic impact, right? Products and services which are irreplaceable, which are differentiated, they are the ones which have the largest pricing power in the market, right? So you can get, they are most valuable, and you can charge high prices for it because they're not replaceable, and others cannot offer them at a lower price, right? So let's take some examples. Let's talk about iPhone, right? So iPhone, I don't have an iPhone, but I understand it's between $500 to $1,000 depending on the model. And if you look at iPhone, which is manufactured in China, estimates say that China only captures $10 for every iPhone manufactured and sold. Whereas the lion's share of the value of iPhone is captured by Apple, which owns the IP and owns the innovation around the product. Similarly, if we look at companies in India, which has been, primarily we've been dominated as a services economy, where we have companies like Infosys, Wipro, and so on. And we have been banking on our demographic dividend, right? All these people which we have who are basically trained in English, and we train them in computer programming and so on. But if we see some of the other companies in the West, like Apple's iPhone or Microsoft Windows or Google search engine, they are way lesser replaceable than the services which we offer in India. And that's why they create much more economic value for themselves and for the country, right? So if we want to capture this economic value, we need to create really innovative companies. Whenever we talk about innovation, suddenly we start talking about startups. Oh, India has this buzzing startup ecosystem, so that should take care of innovation, right? If this is some data from, so MIT Technology Review publishes this list of world's smartest companies every year, right? So I've looked at this data from 2012 to 2016. Now, this is no gold benchmark, but whatever data, there is one source of data which we can look at. If you look at other sources of data, it won't look very different. If you look at the startups, companies coming from India, they are 0 in the MIT's list from 2012 to 2016 of the world's smartest companies. USA, of course, is 105, but China, where's China, is 14, right? So the thing is that we are not really creating globally competitive companies which are really innovative, right? And if you can use other metrics to look at this. A disclaimer is that in 2017, there's one Indian company which did make to the list, though I don't think they're doing anything which is globally Flipkart. I think one thing which we miss in this discourse of when we think about innovation and we say, hey, startups will do it. Startups, in my mind, cannot be globally competitive if they are not in an ecosystem with very strong research universities, right? This is research universities creating new technology, creating new kinds of methods, and then which entrepreneurs exploit to create globally competitive products. So it could be that entrepreneurs are doing research, using research for their products, or just using knowledge spillovers from the universities to create these globally competitive products. And if they need to be competitive sustainably, they have to continuously draw on the knowledge which is being created by researchers in universities, right? So, and I'll read out a little bit from the book to give one example of, and there are several such examples, on the contribution of research on creating great products, right? So we always, whenever we think about, and I don't want to say too much iPhone because I'm in Microsoft, but this example is on iPhone, is that we think about entrepreneurs and we think about startups. But let's just consider this example for a minute. Consider the iPhone. Mariana Mazzucato, a professor in economics of innovations, tells us that most of the critical technologies in the iPhone were created through university research and government-funded projects. Most of this happened in the United States. The multi-touch scrolling and gesturing technology for screens was developed by Westerman and Elias at the University of Delaware. So that's the multi-touch screen which we have. The research that culminated in the technology was developed over decades of study into capacitive touch screens and was first initiated in the 1960s by a British government agency. The GPS system that enables our maps and navigation were built by the US Department of Defense for military purposes in the 1970s. The technology was not released for public use until the mid-90s. The speech recognition that Apple's Siri uses to understand your instructions has its roots in the work done at CMU in the lab of Raj Reddy, a scientist of Indian origin. The speech recognition technology is already being disrupted by a new technique called deep learning invented at the University of Toronto. So if you look at iPhone, it's using technologies which have come out of university research, and of course, and then there's a smart entrepreneur who's putting a lot of engineering and further innovation in it to make a product like iPhone. But what I'm trying to say is that one of the important factors for creating these globally competitive products is proximity to great research and being in company of people who are creating this new knowledge and being able to use in your products, right? Till now I've talked about using this research to create products which are differentiated, but research is also leading to these macro disruptions, right? So the Industrial Revolution was one of the disruptions which happened way back. Some estimates say that before the Industrial Revolution, India used to contribute to the 23% of the world GDP, and then we could not participate in the Industrial Revolution due to various issues, and we slid down. If you look at the Internet Revolution, smartphone revolution, the largest internet companies don't come from India. The largest smartphone companies don't come from India. The largest app companies don't come from India, right? So, and now we are going through the AI revolution, and as far I understand, being in the talent business, there's hardly trained talent for AI in India. It's very small. So if we need to be participating and get the first comer advantage in all these revolutions which are happening, which are driven, a lot by research, we need to be in geographical proximity to that research, which makes it very important for India to continuously engage in high quality research. The second reason, which I say, so the first reason is more that why I think it's almost a necessity for India. If we want to continue to be competitive globally and be in the game, we need to have research and our companies being in that ecosystem on research. This is just one example, right? Any country which is going into research or university or individual, generally a Me Too approach doesn't work, right? You need to have your strong differentiators on why you would be able to make more impact. I think India has one of those differentiators of being able to run on low cost, right? Just based on the kind of socioeconomics we have, plus some of the necessities of a market. Like, for example, we know that the Mars orbiter was created at a fraction of cost of similar orbiters created in the West. Can we use this same cost advantage in, let's say, medical instrumentation, creating public goods which could create substantially less expensive scanning and diagnosis machines? Right? So this is an advantage India can offer to the world, and I think India almost has a responsibility to offer this to the world because it can do it, and it has shown it in other programs like in space, right? But at the same time, when we talk about this, a lot of debate goes to what we call as frugal innovation, right? In India, we are very good at jugaad, we are very good at frugal innovation. The position I'm taking is that we need to see how to do innovations which solve the problem equally well but at a lower cost, rather than pulling down the solution to hacks and jugaads. So the frugal innovation is good in certain contexts, but if we can create fundamental new value at a lower cost, at low resources or differentiated resources, that could be much more beneficial to the world. So I've just put this as an example that, for example, if we try to find a cure to cancer at a much lower cost, that could be really beneficial to the world. The point here is, what I'm trying to say is that India has a potential to create public goods through research at a much lower cost than the rest of the world. And that is one reason I think India should be doing research. The third is, we today have, and we are probably in times where every person has opinion on everything, right? And the news shows have gone, but thanks to Arnab Goswami, now it's just all crazy, it's a shouting match. But what I think is that science must be the basis of our national development, right? There are so many questions which we have to answer as we are moving, as our society is transforming, and we have tons of problems to solve, right? To as simple a personal issue as, and I have a 14-year-old baby, that's why you see that question, but do you want to massage, should you massage the body of a baby and so on? Or how do you clean Ganga? Or some of the questions which I guess people at Microsoft Research also look at. How do you educate and educate scalably? We need to inculcate the scientific approach to come to the answers of these questions, right? Which is evidence-drawn. So the West has had this long culture of what they call as public intellectuals. So in the US, you would very often, when you'll ask someone a question, you'll hear this disclaimer that I'm not an expert on this topic, but this is my answer, right? You don't hear that in India. So that whole idea, everyone is an expert on everything, right? So that whole idea of specialization and knowing one field very well, knowing the literature, knowing the state of art, and being able to speak from that position of evidence about a topic is pretty much missing. Until we don't create, a critical mass of great researchers in India, this will not spill over to our society. So to really create this spillover, we need a good set of people who are specialists and who understand their fields very, very well. And then we also be able to, the second problem is to be able to connect them to the general ecosystem. So just to sum up what I've said till now, the first point which I'm broadly making is that if India wants to continue to be globally competitive and create economic value for itself, it needs to start investing in research. China realized this 20 years back. It's today fighting with the US on AI. That's one way of saying it. So what I was saying was, to summarize, what I'm trying to say here is that if India needs to continue to be competitive globally, it needs to invest in research and creating new knowledge than just using new knowledge, and be in proximity of where new knowledge is being created, to be first comers and exploit that knowledge. Second, what I'm saying is that India has certain intrinsic strengths in which it can create differentiated research and create value for the whole world. And the third point which I was saying was that if you look at just the progress of our own nation, we need to bet on science, right? Having said that, there are all these reasons and others. I think this is one of the most opportune time for India to invest in scientific research. So it's now or never. And why do I say that? See, we are now one of the we are the third largest economy in the world. We are the fastest growing economy. There is money to be invested in research and innovation, other than investing in short-term programs, right? So 20 years back, you would say that why should I not invest in poverty alleviation or an NREGA, which will give me immediate dividends, then in science, which will give me long-term dividends. I think today there's money for both with the government and with private individuals. The number of billionaires in India it's quite an astounding list, right? We have a large manpower, which can, so we have this critical mass of both consumers in the country. We have critical mass of trained people who can take the fruits of the research all the way to a product and to the market, right? So we have consumers, and all countries don't have that benefit, right? There are countries which just don't have the critical mass to scale a product, to test a product, or critical mass to build a team with very different skills. And third, I mean, I've combined the second two. Third is that we are in a time when technology has touched lives of people, right? Even a person who's a rickshawala or an auto driver has seen how GPS can help him in navigating distances. There are people who have gone on to Ubers and Olas and increased their their economic status by quite a bit. People go to medical centers and use MRI machines and ultrasound machines and so on. So we are in a stage where for the government it is easier to convince people to invest in science and technology, right? Because general people have seen the value of science and technology in their lives. Probably in the last 10 to 15 years, we have had the most amount of direct impact and visible impact of science and technology through businesses on our lives. So that's why I think that we are in a very, very good situation to start making this investment and ramping it up. But we are in a phase where there's exponential speed of innovation. It's just crazy. I'm sure as researchers, at least I find it hard to keep up with what are the developments in the different areas and where is technology to do, given there's neuroscience, there's genetics, there's computer science, etc., and all of them are like crazily bursting, right? So I don't know how long a window we have. So, I spent enough time on motivating why it is important to an audience probably who was already motivated and thought research is important. So let me move to the second part of the presentation on where does India stand in research. So the second part is where does India stand, and then what are the reasons, and I try to present a lot of data which I collected for this book through analysis of public data and through surveys and so on. So this is a very simple comparison. This is based on citations, which is research impact. So if you just look at by the total rank on the number of citations created, and this is over a 5-year data, USA is first, China second, and India is 12th, right? So we are far gap from USA and China. I know whenever you say citations, researchers are not happy because they say MIT and Stanford gets cited more often than we are, even if we write equivalently good papers. So I did another exercise where I said, okay, let's look at papers in top conferences, right, from all these countries. And we chose some conferences and some journals in all the fields and tried to say that, okay, if I look at citation ratio versus if I look at ratio of number of papers in top conferences, is it very different? So if you see, it is not very different. If you see, India is like 9.42 of USA in terms of citations. In terms of number of papers in top conferences, 9.46. Right? So it's not, of course, this is not at all different. In China, it is 21% versus 27%. Right? So this whole citation business, whereas there's some truth to it, but really, of course, we don't produce enough good quality papers. That's pretty clear. If we take our publications in top conferences as a benchmark. And you see that for some it was very different, like for Australia, I don't know. Their papers get a lot more citations even if they are not in top conferences for some reason. But if you look at aggregate, it's not much different. So this is not a reason we should hide behind, which a lot of academics do. I also tried to look at how India does on disruptive innovation, which is simplistically saying that where papers which garner more than 100 citations, right? So if you see India's output there, China is 7x and USA is 15x of India. Again, we can see how India does with respect to citations versus with respect to highly cited papers. So what we see is that India is worse off if we look at highly cited papers. So in terms of total citations, we are 9.5% of US. In terms of highly cited papers, we are 6.5% of the US. For China, we are 21% with respect to citations, but we are 14% in respect to highly cited papers. So there's this general notion that, oh no, China is just doing a lot of papers which have no quality, but this data doesn't show likewise. So even if we look at excellence, China does a lot better. So this is just a general idea of where we stand today. This is last 5 years. As disclaimer, India is one of the fastest growing in the number of papers, but China is growing way faster than India is growing in the number of papers. And China is also growing way faster in their contribution to citations, where India is not growing as fast. So given that this is the situation, what are the problems in the research ecosystem? And I have tried to filter them out into 5 different points, of course, which doesn't gather all the complexity of the ecosystem, but to some extent. So first thing is that we need a critical mass of high quality researchers. Right? Do we have a bench strength to do good quality research? Like the Modi government has a very poor cabinet bench strength, right? So there are not enough good people on the cabinet who can do stuff. So this is some comparison again. So I looked at researchers in India who do get more than 8 citations a year and compared the numbers with China and US. And this was based on data from Microsoft Academic Research. So you have that repository which gives an API access. So I used that data to do this analysis. So China has 7 times the number of researchers as India has who garner more than 8 citations annually. US has 17 times India. If you see our universities and just the number of faculty members, they are way smaller than similar size in US or China. This is another interesting graph. So the problem is not just the volume, right? It is productivity. So here I have plotted on the x-axis the number of citations, more than 1, more than 2, more than 4, more than 8. It's an exponential decay, so you see a line when you do it. And then I'm seeing that how many researchers get more than 1 citation, how many researchers get more than 2 citations for different countries. And this blue one is India. So you see that, it is under, so USA and UK are pretty much the same line. And then it is China. So China also does better than India, and then it's India. So there's a productivity issue with our researchers. So it's not a sheer number issue. India is the only one here where less than 1 citation is 55%. All of them are less than 50%. You look at more than 8 citations, India is around 14%, China is 21%, and USA is 28%. So there's a productivity issue on the quality of researchers we have in this India, and that goes back to Sriram's point on who wants to be a scientist. So that's what exactly I want to say, that research is a lackluster career in India, right? So when someone gets a rank in an IIT or a civil services exam, it's on first page, right? If you get it in GATE, it is not on the first page of the newspaper. And GATE has got more prominence after PSU started accepting it, rather than when it was being done for PhD programs. So there was a few surveys which I did. One I did with Indian PhD students in the US and asked them, would you like to return to India? A lot of this is evident, but I've just put numbers to it already, right? So 9% only said they want to come back to India immediately. So the interesting thing is that why do they want to come back, right? So 70% of who want to come back say that it's either love for India or family reasons. So it's not really professional or personal incentives which are drawing back, great researchers. It's, their love for the country and family reasons, which is very noble, but will not help us get a critical mass of researchers. And when I surveyed top undergrads and asked them that, do you want to do a PhD? So 40% want to go to the US, 40% want to go to the industry, and 20% are interested in research in India. Right? And I think this 20% is also probably a little exaggerated because it was a form which was asking, why are you interested in research, right? So, but not only are we lose people to the US, but there's an imbalance as some of our smartest people are going to companies. More of them should be going into research. Why are people not opting for research in India? So there were like three broad buckets which I think about. It's awareness and how much do we sell the research career. It's the professional benefits you can get and the personal benefits. And given some examples here of all of these three buckets. On the left side, it is students to go into PhD. On the right side, it is PhD students coming to becoming faculty members, right? So 75% students in undergrad say that no professor ever discussed a research paper, right? So research awareness is pretty low. Only 5% report that anyone ever came and pitched a MS or PhD program in the university, whereas, of course, the companies are lining up to pitch their. So these are very simplistic, but they matter, right? And as an entrepreneur, I know that they matter, right? Around 40% people in the US said that anyone came from India to come and pitch that become a professor with us, right? So 60% didn't have anyone from India coming and pitching to them. So these are basically Indian PhD students in the US. So this is about what kind of awareness and selling do we do of research. The second is professional benefits. So 46% of our top undergrads think that less than 20% professors are good in the IITs and the IIScs, right? I'm not saying that is true or not, but that's the perception of the professional benefit they will get, right? 57% say that getting travel funding is hard for conferences. In fact, this is the only number which was even higher when you looked at students from IIT. So in IIT, 65% said that it is hard to get travel funding out there. For our PhD students in the US, 75% say that US is the place for research, which is probably not very wrong. 50% say that there's not much happening in my field in India. Right? So today, there are not much incentives for, so what I find is that people who are interested in more social sciences are more interested to come back to India because there are problems they can work on, but computer scientists don't really find much value, or a lot of people in hardcore sciences don't find much value in coming to India. On the personal benefits, low stipend was one of the top 2 reasons cited by kids in top colleges of not joining a PhD. Some people are smiling, maybe they agree. We now have the PM Research Fellowship, which came out a month back, which has its own set of problems. But still, I think there's some good intent out there. And low respect, which is not quantifiable, but that's, I think, a vicious circle which is happening in PhD. And poor career path, right? I mean, how many places like Microsoft Research are there where after doing a PhD, you can go and work? Or, you know, how many top universities do we have? Most of our universities are interested in teaching faculty. So career path is very poor. I think the starting salary for a professor is, crazy, right? It's like 10 lakhs, you know, so which is, as I say, it's lower than the starting salary of a fresher at a Microsoft, Google, or Amazon, right? So nowhere in the world do faculty members get paid as much as industry, but they are not so notoriously low, you know. So in the book, I show the same comparisons in other countries with companies, and India is really poor. We have to get to a salary level where salary gets out of question, at least in the discussion. So today we cannot attract a critical mass of people just because we don't have any of these 3 working for us. So the first thing is people, which I've talked about. The second is about the environment, right? So the simple analogy I give is that we liberalized our economy in the 1990s, and we had a boom in the business. We took back regulations and we let the market compete, and suddenly we became, from the Hindu rate of growth, we went to be one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We have not liberalized our science ecosystem, right? So it is still marred with a lot of controls and regulations, both at the institutional level and at an individual level, right? So at an institutional level, our institutions don't have an independent board. The director of the institute is not chosen by the board, but in case of IITs, by an IIT council. Salaries are regulated, benefits are regulated. There's, always this tension between, can IITs decide whether they can spend their own money or not, when they can decide or not. I met a professor at IIT Delhi last month, and he said that, you know, we were doing this construction and suddenly the government came and told us that, oh no, but you can only use government contractors. So please stop this construction, right? So there could be things as simple, you cannot imagine what kind of things there could be. And the interesting thing is that some of it, so there's an IIT charter, and I'm just taking IIT as an example, which gives certain autonomy to these institutions, which is not always, not always the best, but government goes even beyond the IIT charter and, takes away autonomy from institutions. So today, if IITs say that, hey, I want to hire the star professor who's at a much higher salary, they have to go by what the pay commission says. And some of you might be aware that the government is working on this new proposal of institutes of eminence. I've read that document, there's no visibility on whether the institutes will have autonomy on a salary or not, right? So there's this huge problem of autonomy at an institutional level so that they can function the way they want. The same thing is at individual level. So at an IIT or even at IIC, any government body, if you want to purchase something which is more than 50,000, you have to put together a tender committee. You need to take out advertisements with newspapers, then get bids and so on. It takes 3 to 6 months to run that process, which would have taken probably an overnight shipping in the US, right? So there's bureaucracy at the individual level, there's bureaucracy at the institutional level, and we have still a lot of regulations, yes. Whenever we talk about autonomy, we have to talk about accountability, right? So they're like a mishmash. If you give people autonomy and independence, then they need to be accountable. And this is something which China has done very, very well. It gives a lot of money to its universities, give them independence, of course, till they don't say anything against Mao and all those different issues they have. But then they really look at performance, right? And you get more money if you perform. If you don't perform, you get lesser money, and so on. So they create this internal competition. In India, we have lack of autonomy and lack of accountability, right? So it is not that, there's for our government institutions, and there's one interesting point here from the standpoint of economics, that in a market, you just liberalize the market and competition will play out itself, right? If we assume certain efficiencies in the market. But in research, that competition has to be played out by the funding organization, because the fruits of the research are long-term and not immediately, and government funds most of the research, unlike consumers buying products, right? So the government has to create that accountability, or whoever is giving the money has to create that accountability. Again, at an institutional level and an individual level, we don't see that metric of accountability. A lot of people here would probably know that US has that draconian tenure system where you get thrown out of 7 or 10 years if you don't perform. In an institution like MIT, one statement which they say on whether you should get tenure or not is that you should add to the reputation of the institute, right? So it is as stringent. So when a new faculty member comes in, he or she is almost like an entrepreneur to set up this world-class program which gets him tenure. In India, it works neither ways. There are not much disincentives for faculty members if they do not do well. There are not great incentives for faculty members who do very, very well, which doesn't make the system work. So this really needs to change if we wish to change the ecosystem. So we have lack of collaboration within and with globally. And when I talk to researchers, this is very funny. I mean, if I'll ask a researcher, a professor at a university, what is your number one problem? He said travel money, right? I don't get enough money to travel, and if I get that money, I have to travel Air India and I have to get all these approvals. So touching the global community is very, very important, right? Because first, we don't have critical mass ourselves. Right? We don't make large strides because we just don't have critical mass to develop and move technology forward. And if we get cut out from the global community, then we are completely in a tortoise in the well. So we need to globally collaborate. And China, which is doing a lot in AI today, I was talking to the editor of MIT Technology Review, and he said that the Chinese professors, we see them every 2 months here. The amount of collaboration which is going between India and China institutes in AI is formidable. So this is again some data. This has been culled out of annual reports of these institutes. If you just see the number of talks which happen, external talks which happen in a department of MIT or Tsingtao University in China versus how many happen in departments of Indian universities, there's like a 10x difference. Right? As far as I know, getting money for conferences, still there's some institutional mechanism, but getting money for inviting people to give talks is like 10x hard, right? Which is a problem, right? So we don't have critical mass ourselves and we cannot communicate with the larger community. I'm sorry for the small font size here. Again, I just looked at the number of visits students and professors are making. So 25% of the students, PhD students, make international visits in IITs. You see, in computer science in IIT Madras, 75% of faculty members will make a visit once a year, but it drops down to 50 to 17%. So again, our collaboration and visits to the global community is very less, which shouldn't only be to go to conferences, but visit collaborators, invite collaborators, and so on. So to me, this is a major problem which we need to resolve. Similarly, interaction with industry is really poor. When we surveyed PhD students, interaction with industry was like rated second lowest by PhD students. But I think there's hardly any institutional mechanisms to, to liaison with the industry, and you guys might have some thoughts on it. But if I look at MIT, there's like a 50+ people team which just liaisons with the industry, right? In India, what I have generally seen is that there'll be a faculty who has additional responsibility to liaison with the industry. And if you look at some of the websites of without naming the institutes, it's like devastating, right? How they advertise their research and how they attract industry. But again, if you look at patent applications or technology transfer income annually, our universities are way lower. So for an MIT or a Stanford, the patent applications are in 300 to 600 numbers. For Indian university, it's 10 to 15, which has also started happening very recently. Of course, technology transfer income cannot be an apple-to-apple comparison because these universities are much, much older than ours. So collaboration with, globally, collaboration within the community and collaboration with industry will not do very, very well in any of these. So coming to Manohar's debate, it's a debate which I've had several times when I was writing this book, and I'll speak my position on it. But there's this one problem that rather than saying whether we are solving our problems, their problems, what I'm saying is that are we asking bold, original questions? Or are we doing derivative research where the problems are defined by someone in the West and we are doing our tinkering and improving those results, right? So Mashelkar says that there are only two people remembered in science, one who asks the question and one who gives the final answer, and rest all are noise. I don't think we do a very good job in asking original questions, right? And I think that corroborates Manohar's point that we are not going and trying to solve our own problems. Where I would distinguish is that our own problems are not only the socially relevant problems. We also have global companies. We have Infosys, we have Wipro, which could have problems which are the world's problems. They could be solving similar technology problems which any company in the West could be solving. But what we don't see happening a lot is what I call as problem proximity, which is either by working together with the industry, going yourself and working with practitioners, or going and becoming yourself as practitioner. Some of the problems we know, and this is a topic where I can't give you hard data, right? It's a subjective discussion topic. That is the problem which I earlier said, right? The metric of a good PhD cannot be 3 international papers, right? That could be, lower bound on it. The metric of a good or a great PhD is that solve a problem which you really, really feel about, and try to solve it well, right? And that's what I'm saying is that you need to really raise the bar, right? At a place like MIT, and maybe they can afford it as an exception, you may not write any paper and get a PhD. Like when I was coming back after my master's, me and my advisor had a plan that I'll go back for 1 year and do a fast-track PhD and come back. And the only condition was that 3 professors for MIT should sign off and say that this is work good enough for a PhD. And I could have got a PhD if they thought I solved an important enough problem. But what I'm trying to say is that objective metrics, this is like a contradiction to all what I have shown you till now, right? I've shown you all these numbers on citations, on publication, number of publications, and so on. But finally, it is about asking original questions, having proximity to the problem, and then trying to solve them using scientific methods. And another thing which I see lacking in India, and probably these are connected, is that we have lesser systems approach to research. It's about writing a paper, right? It's not about building a system which solves the problem. And again, goes back to problem proximity, right? And then that system in itself kind of keeps churning problems, keep churning data, keep churning questions, and you keep trying to implement things in it, and it kind of becomes a bench. So rather than that, we find, oh, we need to get these 3 international papers. Where can we go and tinker and get my next paper, right? So I think this is definitely a problem. I generally avoid talking about mindset issues. I think there are institutional structures which force mindsets. As soon as we say mindset, then there's no answer to a mindset, right? And the famous example is Hindu rate of growth, where pre-90s, India was not growing because Hindus are those otherworldly people, right? It was a mindset issue. And then we liberalized the economy and suddenly became fastest growing. But we do see this problem. I think the roots are somewhere in the institutional structures. This is just repeating what I said before, but we need to invest in excellence. And I'll touch upon a little bit of your point here, is that we do, definitely we can do with a better science budget, right? What numbers show is that we do less than 1% of our GDP investment in research. India is pretty much the lowest in private investment in research. So in USA, private investment in research is 2 times the government investment. Of course, there's some issue, the way those figures are calculated, where you also take development. But India, it's 50%, right? But so definitely funding is one issue, but I don't think we spend those funds very, very well. You know, so, and I know we are running out of time. 4 is a hard stop. Yes. It is, okay. So, but I'll quickly tell the story that, you know, in the 1970s or the 80s, there was the Kothari Commission, which said that create 5 centers of excellence, 5 great research universities, and so on, and got shot down by the government saying that it is elitist. So a lot of times what we see is that the funds are spread thin across a lot of institutions. The salaries are kept low and a lot more people are given benefit rather than accumulating it in excellence. My own view is that with the current funds, we can do much better if we change our policy structures. Having said that, we should continue to try to advocate for more funds. So my last 2 slides is just summing up what can we do. Government needs to make science a policy. It's a priority and have a holistic long-term plan. The institutes of eminence, PMRF are all good, but there are structural issues which need to be resolved, which I've talked about. We need autonomous research institutions which compete with each other. Today there's no autonomy, there's no competition. Companies need to become innovative. I very strongly believe that if Indian companies don't become innovative, don't start engaging PhD students, we will not sustain our economic growth. All of us need to ask original questions and come up with original solutions. This is what is an interesting slide, and I'll take 2 minutes on this. But research is, anywhere in the world, research is majorly funded by the government. So the question comes as, what can we do as private individuals, right? Till the government is not, quote unquote, doing its job. And I think there are various ways where private individuals can do things, right? One is, of course, private research labs. There's one I'm standing in. There's, again, no critical mass of private research labs in India, but there can be more initiatives on private research labs and research universities. In the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of private teaching universities have come up, which are very serious in giving good teaching. I think they need to move up the ladder to be ambitious to do research. There should be a policy and advocacy body, and maybe one or multiple, for science and technology policy. So we have Pratham for primary education. We have hordes of advocacy bodies for primary education, for higher ed, for food security, etc. We need more for science and technology policy. We can do capacity and ecosystem building as private individuals, right? Like raising the stature of research career in India. Like people don't have any exposure to research talks. Can we create a SPIC McKay of research talks and so on? Can we, there are various different ways we can help build capacity. I think PhD students is the least engaged community in our education system. They can be engaged more in various ways. And we all can be advocates of this at a personal level, right? And then there's a very good group to advocate for, like you were saying, more money for science and technology, liberalization of policy. It's not advocated enough. It doesn't take up the mental space of the government. Someone was telling me that if you create a Twitter trend around this government is so sensitive to Twitter that you suddenly see they trying to do something about it. But so these, I think, as private individuals, and I have a section in the book which just talks about this, that there are various things which we can do, and together with the government, we need to move as private individuals to facilitate change. Thank you. That's what I had to present today. And there's a website which has some of the data which I presented here and some other articles on this. And because AI is so hot, I've tried to look at these same suggestions in the perspective of AI with a white paper on artificial intelligence, which is also available on the website. Thank you.
Time for a few more questions.
I wanted to ask specifically about China. Does your book have any case studies on? So we hear a lot about China from the outside, and we hear success stories a little too late. We don't get an insider view on what are the things they did right and how did they tackle what at that time would have been a mindset issue for them as well.
Sure. So you're right. A lot of it is inaccessible because it is in Mandarin. But what I am told is one of the best sources is an OECD report on China technology policy, which is publicly available, which shows what reforms they did starting end of 80s to now. Another set of literature to look at is that there's a set of books which are edited by a guy called Philip Altbach. Philip Altbach, who is a higher education expert in Boston. And it has several chapters on how China kind of did what it did in the last 25 years.
So you mostly talked about the top universities
Right.
in respective countries, but there is a role of the bigger ecosystem. And if we look at the US versus India, if you look at the tier 2, your graphs, India will not show up anywhere, whereas US will still show up. So in general, did you, I mean, in your book or in your research, compared or look at what's the role of the, tier 2, tier 3 institutions, and like a related question would be this idea of starting more and more IITs. It has its own problems. So what's your take on it?
So I didn't do a lot of quantitative analysis on what other universities are doing. Of course, the aggregate figures on citations and papers which you are talking about has all of them included. One idea I had for private universities, which I talk about in the book, is, of course, research is expensive, right? And all these private universities can't make big research programs, but there are 3,000 engineering colleges in this country. If they pick one, each of them pick one area and kind of get 5-6 good researchers in that one area and create a center of excellence in that. And then we have these network of 3,000 engineering colleges, each in a separate specialization area, and collaborating. That could be very interesting. The other piece on how the private research ecosystem university affects this is in two ways. One, of course, they are the feeders of students who become PhD students, right? So if the quality is poor, then they are poor feeders of PhD students to the top tier universities. And then the career path issue. So all the people who do PhD and come out, where do they go? So if these private institutions don't create those places where they could do research and get good salaries, then there's a huge career path issue. Hopefully now, as the market is changing, more companies will absorb them. I think the opening of more IITs, and I'm not an expert on that topic, but I think it's political. States want IITs in their areas and government appease them and open IITs. I think they should make the current IITs better. They should make the NITs better. We already have a lot of institutions with infrastructure out there. The only reason why you do new institutions is that you believe that you cannot move from the current structures to the new structures, but the new IITs having their own struggle. So, I mean, I don't see the logic. Yeah.
So, as you started your talk, you mentioned that there's a lot of industry takes a lot of the research and actually builds upon it so that it becomes profitable. So even if India becomes really good at say research, we still don't have any manufacturing infrastructure to actually sort of take that research and make it huge. And historically, we have seen, say, if we look at Japan and how they revolutionized their automobile industry. So they started copying European automobiles and then they started innovating in the automobile industry. Similarly, in China, we saw they started copying the mobile phone industry, and then now they've become innovators in mobile phone industry. They're coming out with in-screen fingerprint scanners. They are some of the first they're some of the innovators in mobile phone industry. So have you looked at, like, because I think manufacturing and the infrastructure is more critical to actually taking the country forward rather than
See, I have two comments on it. One, I talk about that in the book as well, that we're talking about manufacturing, but manufacturing is evolving, right? There's a lot of robotization in manufacturing, right? Taiwan has much more, robotization than China has, and China has put goals on how much to robotize their factories. When we have the same discussion in India, we have no talk about this. We are talking about a make in India, but we don't talk about technology-driven manufacturing and robotization. Right? So that's where the discourse should change. When I'm talking about research, remember that I'm not only talking about that everything is creating of new knowledge. I'm saying that if you have research locally, then you have local expertise and that will have spillovers and you'll get that talent to run. So I'm totally okay with manufacturing being copied and then innovating. India, what is happening is that we do the first part of copying. We don't do the second part of innovating, which China has done. Look at IT services industry. We have had a 25-year head start. End of 80s, we have been doing IT, right? We have not climbed the innovation ladder at all. Look at China, they don't have IT services at all, but their internet companies are way more evolved than our internet companies. So I'm okay with copying, but then that innovation and continuously adding value, that is what is missing.
No, I'm saying even if the innovation comes, do you think our country has the infrastructure to support, to take that innovation and actually create it into something huge?
I think there are different moving parts in the ecosystem and each have to go up in tandem. What you are talking about is talked about a lot, right? What I'm talking about is not talked about a lot. So my aim was to bring what is not being talked about and is a necessary ingredient to the forefront. Not saying that we shouldn't do the other things which we already are trying to do.
So then let's thank Varun again.
Thank you.